I've been dumping hours of my life recently playing a little game called No Man's Sky, which I picked up for the first time earlier this year in 2023. And as I've been trying to make sense of its general point and its appeal and its mechanics, I've come to regard it as posing kind of an interesting problem for video game criticism. The problem, in my opinion, is that it's a very good game. Honestly, it's one of the best games I've ever played. But due to the kind of game that it is, it can be really hard to find words that can accurately convey what its appeal is and what makes it special. The best way to dive into this difficulty is to consider a criticism that I think I see most often leveled by the game's detractors. The criticism is that the game is basically a chore simulator. No Man's Sky is a game about doing chores in space. Whether it's mining or foraging or refueling or processing raw materials, whether it's buying or selling on the market, saving your money for better equipment and gear, or just prospecting the cosmic wilderness in search of planets with more and better materials. The game is mostly about grinding out your chores and doing honest to God hard work so you can afford to buy nice things. But once you get those nice things, it's not as though your chores ever end. Whenever you buy nice equipment in No Man's Sky, its real purpose is just to help you do chores a little bit more efficiently. And so the game is really just about a cycle of working hard and then buying stuff that allow you to keep working hard but a little bit more efficiently, and maybe also with a little bit more style. In a more traditional game, this cycle of work would be more like side content that you would do to take a break from the more exciting stuff, which typically is going to be combat. And the reason it would be side content is because it's just not the kind of thing that would be able to support an enjoyable gaming experience. But in No Man's Sky, it's the main course. As far as I can tell, the point really is to grind out your chores in an infinite cycle of work. I mean, don't get me wrong though, there are some things that you can do other than chores. There's also a base building and exploration component, both of which are pretty obviously awesome. No Man's Sky produces some of the best explorable environments out there, and there's a lot of creative satisfaction to be had from building a base on your cosmic world of choice. But exploration and base building, most of the time, take a backseat to your chores. Building bases is expensive, and to afford it, you need to spend a lot of time making money. And exploration is generally driven by the fact that you need to do all your chores in the first place, and they require you to hunt around for the right planet to find the things you need to make things happen. So again, No Man's Sky is primarily a game about doing chores in space. And then on the side, you can also be an explorer and a builder. But anyways, here's why I'm telling you all of this. I've seen quite a few negative reviews of the game describe it in pretty much the same terms that I'm describing it right now. But they offer this description as a way of explaining to you what makes No Man's Sky ultimately kind of boring and disappointing. And when I read these criticisms, I find it kind of funny because I think in a way they're saying something true about the game. Like it really is a chore simulator. That really is how I play the game. And I totally grant that when you just describe it that way, it sounds like it should be a boring and forgettable experience. But that's not what it is at all. For me anyway, as somebody who's just recently picked up the game, it's easily the best thing that I've played since the release of Elden Ring early last year in 2022. But I'm having trouble putting into words why it's so engaging to do endless chores in space. But I have made a little bit of progress on this question, and that's what I want to share with you. One of the hallmarks of a great piece of media, for me at least, is that it'll be filled with singular moments that I'll experience, and they'll make me just want to go out and tell someone about it. I can never really understand why this happens, but when I see something that I think is cool, I just want to go and talk to somebody about it, and I want them to appreciate the cool thing too, and I want everyone to share in this experience that makes me happy. And so whenever I can't figure out why I like a game, or really any piece of media, I find that a good place to start is to select a few of those moments that I really wanted to share, because more often than not, they encapsulate an important part of what makes the game great. And in the case of No Man's Sky in particular, which is the game that I want to understand, since it's so massive and since it's so completely open ended in the kind of gameplay that it invites, it's a lot easier to think microscopically about some of my favorite episodes of my experience with the game than to try to make some kind of broad, summative statement about how the game works as a whole. Because it's a hard game to summarize. But a smaller episode of gameplay can be like a microcosm that will unlock the secrets of what makes the whole great and what makes it what it is. So let me tell you about a gameplay moment that I had just the other night. I landed on an alien planet, and as I was exploring the area, I actually managed to lose my starship. Now, normally that's impossible because your starship typically appears as a little blip on your radar, so you always know what direction it's in. You can always find it if you need it. But this time, as I was exploring this planet, I stumbled upon another broken starship that had crashed and had been abandoned, and I decided that I was going to claim it as my own. But in doing this, I accidentally turned off the little blip on my radar that tells me where my old functional starship is. And when you do that, as far as I know, you can't actually turn the blip back on until you physically find it and get inside the cockpit again. So suddenly I was stuck on this alien planet, and I realized that I had no idea what direction my starship was in. North, south, east, west, no idea. And let me tell you, in No Man's Sky, your starship is your lifeline. If you are stuck on a planet with no starship, there's no game. And so my first instinct was, okay, I have to look online and figure out if there's some way to get my old starship back up on my radar so that I could find it quickly and carry on with my business. But as soon as I had that thought, another impulse kind of came over me. The second impulse was, look, No Man's Sky is a game about solving practical problems. Losing my ship accidentally, that problem is part of the game. And so is finding a solution. I shouldn't look online to figure out how to solve this problem. The point of the game is to use what knowledge I have to solve this problem for myself because I created it. So I looked around and I noticed that the local vegetation grows really tall and has these big platforms that you can stand on. So you could climb up it with your jetpack and you could survey the landscape, and maybe a nice high vantage point will be useful for spotting my ship. And so I decided to set up a perimeter around the area where I guessed my ship was most likely to be, and I started climbing these big alien trees, adopting the high ground, surveying the land, and looking for my ship. And it took me about 10 or 15 minutes, but finally, I found the ship. And with a sigh of relief, I got back in, I lifted off, and I flew back to the nearest space station. Now, it may surprise you to hear that this story was actually one of my highlights in all the time that I've spent with No Man's Sky. Part of what I found so interesting about it is that I solved a problem that I've never really solved in a game, but which was a lot like a problem that I've solved in real life. In my early 20s, I had an experience that I would consider a near-death experience when I was on a 3-day hike into the wilderness in New England. What happened was, around dawn, I had to go to the bathroom. I was in a campsite, and I wanted some privacy, so I decided to go off the trail a little bit. But because I'm a little bit absent-minded and not exactly what you'd call an experienced hiker, I failed to keep track of the direction that I came from. And suddenly, once I finished going to the bathroom, I had this dreadful realization that I had no idea what direction my campsite was in. Was it north, south, east, west? I don't have a clue. And I was like a 1-day hike from civilization. And at first I started to panic. I thought, okay, I'm going to die in the stupidest way possible. But then I had a little moment of insight. I heard a stream that was running not far from me, and I knew that that stream intersected with the campsite. So I followed the noise, found the stream, followed the stream back to the site, got in my sleeping bag, and waited for everybody else to wake up. And I actually didn't even mention to anybody else that this happened to me because I felt so stupid. But now, fast forward about 10 years, and I'm playing No Man's Sky, I get lost in the wilderness, I lose my ship, I don't remember what direction it's in, and it totally brings me back to this stupid near-death experience that I had in my early 20s trying to go to the bathroom while on a hike. And what really strikes me about the similarity between this real life experience and this problem I had in No Man's Sky is that I used the same kind of problem solving skills in both cases. I didn't find my ship in No Man's Sky using video game logic. I wasn't able to do it because I'm good at video games. I was able to do it because I had whatever skill I had when I got lost in the wilderness that one time in my early 20s. And that kind of thing feels like it happens in No Man's Sky a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a realistic game, it's very video gamey. But I find that you encounter these problems like the one I'm talking about now where I lost my ship, where to solve them, you just kind of have to think like a real person in real life. It's not about knowing game mechanics, it's just about being rational and critically thinking. And that sort of thing does not happen very often in video games, but it does happen a lot in No Man's Sky. And I think it's an important clue in the puzzle of what makes this game special. Okay, I want to tell you about one other gameplay story that I think will furnish a little bit more material for understanding a little bit about what makes No Man's Sky unique. This one's about the first time I ever made a ton of in-game currency at one time and bought some big-ticket items. What happened was I stumbled on this paradise planet that was simply covered in this expensive item that's called a gravitino ball. For those who don't know, gravitino balls are kind of rare, you don't see them a ton, and they sell for a lot of credits. When you do find them, it's normally like an isolated kind of incident. And whenever you pick it up, these bad guy robots called Sentinels, they like sense that you've done this, they don't like it, and they chase after you. I guess that's the game's way of making it a little bit dangerous to pick up some really high value loot. But this paradise planet that I found, there was gravitino balls basically as far as the eye could see. Basically every 10 seconds, you'd stumble on a clump of 3, 4, 5, 10 gravitino balls at once. And I went on this kind of hour-long chase sequence, where every time I collected a gravitino ball, the Sentinels got mad at me, and they were just chasing me this whole time, and I was picking up tons and tons of these, and I ended up making something like 15 million credits. That was really the first time I'd ever had more than 2 million credits at once, and I instantly got an A-class starship with my money. That was the first ship that I got after the crappy baby ship that they start you with when you begin the game. And it was really satisfying. I felt like I earned it, but I also got lucky, or like luck presented an opportunity, and then my smart thinking exploited that opportunity to its maximum potential, and this new ship of mine was my well-earned material reward. But this story doesn't have a totally happy ending, because in the end, I actually forgot where this special gravitino planet is located. So I have been unable to return and cash in another nice paycheck. Again, for those who don't know, No Man's Sky has a completely stupid number of planets in its universe. I think the marketing says it's something like 18 quintillion. And that means the only way you're ever going to be able to return to a planet if you leave the system that it's in is probably you're going to have to build a base there, and then the game is going to let you teleport there whenever you find a teleporter. But in my absent-mindedness, I failed to build a base on this gravitino planet. If memory serves me correctly, I think it's because those Sentinels were really hot on my trail, and I just felt like a fire was under my butt. I had to get out and get away as soon as possible, and I just didn't think about a way to mark this planet to come back later. And so now it's forever lost, just a cherished memory that I can never reclaim. Since that happened, though, I have built myself a little gravitino farm on my frigate, which grows a new crop of gravitino balls every hour or so. You can see it right now in my footage. I'm running through, examining my gravitino plants. And every time I harvest my goods, I remember that gravitino planet that I lost forever. And while I cannot have it back, perhaps my humble little gravitino farm can function as a pale shadow to satisfy me in its absence. In most of the games that I play, the stories that I naturally form and walk away with and want to share with other people are typically a result of carefully crafted set pieces, or moments that the developer has curated and designed and tested to hit you in a certain way. I'm a big Elden Ring fan, for example. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And the big stories that I like to talk about from that game are the boss encounters. Bosses like Margit and Melania become these badges of honor when you beat them, and Elden Ring kind of has this culture of swapping war stories about what it was like to face a boss for the first time or beat a boss for the first time. But the greatness of a boss encounter in Elden Ring and the rich material it offers for swapping war stories with other players comes from the way that developer From Software so skillfully micromanages your experience. Any given boss encounter takes place in a fixed and narrow arena. The boss fights with a fixed and narrow moveset. The boss's difficulty is going to be carefully calibrated to provide an appropriate level of difficulty relative to your own progress in the game. And the result of all of this is that everybody's experience is going to be pretty similar. Like, no two encounters with Melania are going to be exactly the same. But it's going to be true of pretty much everybody that the main challenge you have to overcome to beat her is to find out a way to not get hit by her waterfowl dance. And everybody's story with Melania has a similar shape. It's about the struggle that they had dealing with that waterfowl dance. But then when you compare a game like Elden Ring to a game like No Man's Sky, it's easy to see that the kinds of stories that naturally form for a player of No Man's Sky are totally different because the game just has a totally different kind of structure. The developers at Hello Games can't really micromanage your experience in the same way because they've decided to adopt a truly open format design for the gameplay structure of No Man's Sky. On the one hand, the gameplay environments, for the most part, are a result of procedural generation. Developers aren't crafting the worlds you're traveling to. Instead, what they've crafted are algorithms that have the power to create each one of these 18 quintillion worlds that you randomly encounter. And then when it comes to the gameplay scenarios that players are going to stumble into whenever they end up on a planet, it's not going to be like Elden Ring, where everyone's ultimately going to be doing the same thing, just fighting things they see. Instead, it's going to be the result of whatever idiosyncratic objective you've set for yourself to exploit some planet's resources to make a quick buck, to build your base, whatever you want to do. And this means that all of the stories that are going to naturally form for you out of your gameplay with No Man's Sky are going to be totally unique to you. They're going to bear the signature of your playstyle and your luck with the deliverances of procedural generation. Just like my own story of losing my ship on that desolate world. No one else is going to have that story, not exactly that one, because it derived from my own sort of absent-minded way of engaging with the deliverances of this procedurally generated world that I had discovered. And if I had to guess, I'd say that it's this way in which every player's stories and experiences with No Man's Sky bear their own unique personal stamp and signature, which is responsible for the fact that the game has such a long-lasting cult following. There's this deep fact about human nature that we just become kind of attached to the things that we create. And all of your experiences in No Man's Sky feel like you're the one who created them. They're yours in the way that your real life is yours. And I think that all of this also goes a long way to resolving the puzzle that I observed at the beginning of this video, namely that No Man's Sky is ultimately kind of a chore simulator. It's a game about doing chores in space, which by all rights should be boring, but ends up being this highly imaginative and absorbing sci-fi fantasy. At least part of the secret to this special sauce is that your player history doesn't exactly feel like it's the product of a game's developers or writers in the way that a more traditional linear experience feels, or even the largely non-linear Elden Ring for the reasons that we observed a few moments ago. All the environments and all the encounters in this game are procedurally generated. No one created them. And you're the only thing that's really directing your own progression through the universe. And so it feels like you, the player, are the producer of your experiences in just the same way that you produce experiences in your real life. And even chores are enjoyable when you feel like they're a part of your own effort to realize a life that you're satisfied with and which feels like something that you created for yourself to enjoy. I think that most video games feel like interactive movies. They have kind of a plot-like structure with a beginning, a middle, an end, a problem, a climax, and so on, and you're kind of just there to go along for the ride. But No Man's Sky is a little bit different. That doesn't feel like an interactive movie. Playing No Man's Sky kind of just feels like you're trying to live your own life, except in a far cooler world than the cultural wasteland of suburban America or wherever you live. You end up with a unique player history that really feels like it's a reflection of your own personal quirks and propensities and efforts and development as an agent in this vast universe. And that is all I have to say about this game for now, I think. My name is Chumpy, and thanks for watching.